Hi everyone, meteorologist Bryan Bennett. We have an unorganized area of storms right now to the eastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula here in the Bay of Honduras. This is going to move north and likely become a tropical storm. It'll be called Tropical Storm Michael and continue to drift to the north, possibly making landfall in the Florida Panhandle. But honestly, everybody from Tampa Bay all the way up to New Orleans should be keeping a pretty close eye on this storm. Here's a closer look at the infrared satellite imagery, and this is actually 1 minute imagery, which is kind of a cool feature we have with satellites nowadays, that we have satellite data that is sent down every minute. So that's kind of impressive. But with this, I don't really see a defined circulation, just kind of a big area of storminess with a few convective bursts. So we don't have a defined center, and we're not going to get a defined center until the storm reaches basically the northern Yucatan area. And without a defined center, it's kind of difficult for the computer models to predict exactly where the storm will be making landfall. So still some uncertainties, but what I can show you is what the models are predicting right now. So I made this little graphic here to kind of give you an idea of what the models are forecasting at this point. So here we have the European computer model, which is one of the more reliable models, and it has it making landfall right around the western Florida Panhandle. The GFS, the experimental GFS, and the IBM Deep Thunder also have it making landfall in the western Florida Panhandle. The HWRF, which is a little bit more of a finer grid, a mesoscale model, has it making landfall right around Panama City Beach, so a bit farther east, perhaps representing a bit more of a weakness in the high pressure than some of these global models. The ICON model, which is a new German model, actually has it making landfall a bit farther east, perhaps around the Big Bend area. And then the somewhat less reliable NAV Gem and the HMON and the CMC have it making landfall a bit farther west. But there are some uncertainties. So again, Tampa Bay to New Orleans, keep an eye on this storm. Right now, though, the models are kind of honing in on the Florida Panhandle location. As you know, I like the European model the most, so we'll take a look at the rainfall and wind scenarios based on the European in just a second. But first of all, here's the official track from the National Hurricane Center for potential tropical cyclone number 14. Winds are right now 30 miles per hour in this area of storminess, and the whole blob is moving off to the north at about 6 miles per hour. Expected to become Tropical Storm Michael on Sunday night and then drift off to the north. High pressure then kind of backs out, allowing it to make a northeasterly turn towards the Florida Panhandle, most likely as we move into Wednesday afternoon. All right, so a big feature controlling where this storm is going to go is an area of high pressure to the north. Once again, high pressure is a controlling feature, as it has been for many of the storms this season. This high pressure is pretty big. It's taking up the entire east coast from Canada all the way to Florida, and these tropical systems cannot just dive right through the middle of a high pressure. They have to go around them. So the strength of this high pressure and how far east it goes is going to be a big controlling factor in exactly where this tropical system ends up making landfall. So the European model here actually has the high pressure system strengthening a little bit as the tropical system is moving off to the north. There it is right there by the Yucatan. And then they actually have it weakening a little bit. So if it does indeed weaken, it's going to allow the storm system to then make a turn to the northeast. If it doesn't weaken, then it's going to make more of a northerly or even a northwesterly track. So again, a lot dependent on this high pressure here. But I will say the European handles these mid-latitude systems really well. So I think this is a model scenario that we can count on for being pretty close to what the ultimate scenario is going to be. All right, so let's take a look at the future radar, and let's fast forward here to here we are Tuesday night, and perhaps even a little bit of rain starting to enter the very western part of Florida. Fast forwarding to Wednesday night, that's when we're starting to see some of the heavier rain, especially on the right quadrant of the storm. The storm is going to be fighting up against some wind shear, so it's unlikely to be a kind of textbook looking storm with a very symmetric left and right side. Instead, it's probably going to be really weighted to the right quadrant of the storm due to the wind shear kind of beating it up a little bit. Nonetheless, the storm's expected to move off to the north, again, possibly making landfall in the Florida Panhandle. and then continuing its northeasterly track. Unlikely to be anything like a tropical storm or Hurricane Harvey, because we're not expecting a blocking high just to sit to the north and block it from moving north. So we're not expecting 50 inches of rain out of this particular system. But nonetheless, it is a tropical system, so the potential for some heavy downpours definitely exists. Here's a look at the rainfall totals over the next couple of days, and you can see in the red here we're averaging about 3, 4, 5 inches of rain. A few areas possibly picking up a little bit more, maybe 7 or 8 inches of rain. And based on the current path, the peninsula of Florida not picking up a ton of rainfall, but if this path were to shift perhaps a bit eastward, more towards where the German model has it, then obviously the Tampa Bay area and western Florida would be picking up more precipitation, and also in some of those outer bands would even have the risk of an isolated tornado or two. So the exact track is yet to be determined, but it's going to have a big controlling factor in exactly the type of weather that this area will likely see. All right, so here's a look at the projected wind model based on the European. And let's fast forward here. There you can see the tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane. It's not out of the question that this storm could actually become a hurricane before making landfall. And it's going to make landfall right now projected to be on Wednesday. And again, the European model has it doing so in the Florida Panhandle. Winds could be blowing anywhere from 70 to say about 80 miles per hour. But exactly how strong this storm becomes depends on a couple of different weather scenarios. And one of those weather scenarios is the temperature of the water. Well, the water is plenty warm enough, so we can put a check mark next to that because water will be warm enough to sustain a hurricane. The second thing will be how much moisture is available in the atmosphere. Well, as the storm system tries to get its act together right around the southern Gulf of Mexico, it's going to have some fairly moist air around it, so I don't think moisture will be a limiting factor in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, right before it makes landfall, the European is predicting that some dry air will move in. If some of that dry air entrains into the storm, that could limit it or weaken it as it is making landfall. So that'll be something to watch towards the middle part of the week, right as it's attempting to make landfall. Wind shear is another big factor. Now, right now, check this out. We have a huge area of wind shear represented by this brown color, and the storm would really have trouble surviving in this particular environment if it were to try to move north right now. But what's going to happen is as the storm starts to drift to the north, well, so does that wind shear. The wind shear actually starts to move out of the way, so we have a more favorable environment for the storm to develop in the southern Gulf of Mexico. Now, the wind shear doesn't go away completely, and that's likely going to be a limiting factor for this tropical system. It'll likely keep it as a strong tropical storm or maybe even a lower end Cat 1 hurricane, but if by some means this tropical system can fight off the wind shear, then the potential does exist for it to become a little bit stronger system or a little bit stronger hurricane, and that's a potential we'll have to keep an eye out for in the coming days as well. All right, so a big factor also, a lot of us are watching red tide, and I know it's been mentioned that we could really use a hurricane to just totally get rid of all this red tide. Got to let you know, though, that that's not necessarily always the case. It depends on where these tropical systems go. In the case of what could be Michael, we would actually have a southwest flow, which could actually drag some of these higher concentrations of Carina brevis to the north and kind of bring worse conditions once again to Sarasota and maybe even Pinellas County once again. So the track of what could be Michael, not really the greatest scenario for red tide, but that's something I'm going to make another video about. Look out for that video tomorrow. I'll have that in more detail, but that's kind of the basics of what's going on with this tropical system, where we're expecting it to go and who it's going to impact. And again, there will be some changes that will occur over the next couple of days, and again, once it especially gets defined right around the northern end of the Yucatan, and that's when we'll really be able to define more precisely where this tropical system is going. All right, though, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your weekend.